On February 9th, I'll be announcing my plans in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Now, Lawrence has a history of working people coming together to make change, where the fight was hard, the battle was uphill, and where a group of women led the charge for all of us. Back then, and still today, Lawrence is a diverse community working hard and boldly pursuing the American dream. It holds a special place in my heart, and I am excited to share that story with you on February 9th.
Welcome back to AM Joy. Well, just a few minutes from now, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts is expected to officially announce her 2020 presidential campaign from Lawrence, Massachusetts, a textile mill city with a rich labor history and where Latinos make up more than 3/4 of the city's population. Warren, who's proposing a wealth tax on ultramillionaires, will be joining Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Julian Castro, Kirsten Gillibrand, and others as part of a Democratic field vying to unseat Donald Trump in 2020. A field that may soon include Minnesota Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, who says that she will unveil her 2020 decision tomorrow. And joining me now is Leah Wright Rigueur, Assistant Professor of Public Policy at Harvard Kennedy School and author of The Loneliness of the Black Republican. MSNBC political contributor Jason Johnson, Karine Jean-Pierre of MoveOn.org, Gyasi Ross, Native American activist and contributing editor of Indian Country Today, political consultant Jimmy Williams, and MSNBC senior politics editor Beth Fouhy. Thank you all for being here. This should be an interesting speech. I'm just going to go around the table and sort of talk about some of the significance of it. I'll start with you here at the table, Leah. A lot of women running. The front runners, if you just go by the buzz and the excitement around their candidacies, appear to be the two women, Kamala Harris and now, obviously, Elizabeth Warren is going to come in big because she has these big ideas about taxing, et cetera. What does she need to do today to make herself, to get herself beyond the one thing people all want to talk about, which is her DNA?
So Elizabeth Warren has to do the thing that she's actually best at doing, which is she has to talk about the little people. She has to talk about the people on the ground. She has to talk about Main Street. She has to talk about Americans. I mean, one of her signatures in the areas in which she's really excelled and where she's really distinguished herself has been railing against big banks, talking about, the people on the ground, talking about unions, talking about workers. And so we're going to have to see a lot of that, a lot of new ideas. We're going to have to see a lot of policy. We're going to have to see her bringing ideas like unions back in. And then also, too, finding a place for women, finding a place for immigrants, finding a place, for people of color, and making that into a coalition and bringing out really strong and important policy positions that affect all of those groups.
Yeah, and let me go to Beth, because, Beth, I know you're out there for this speech today. The choice of where this is taking place was very significant, obviously, for Elizabeth Warren. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's here at her home state, of course, Joy, in Massachusetts. But as you said in your intro, this city has a very significant history in terms of the labor movement. And for somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who's really made her political career all about economic inequality, how rich people and the banks and big business have taken advantage of the little people, this is a smart spot for her to start. This is the site of the 1912 Bread and Roses strike. It's a textile strike that was very significant in the history of the labor movement. Women, by the thousands, walked off their textile jobs in 1912 after textile owners decided to cut their pay in response to a state law cutting women's working hours. This was an amazing strike. It brought together women of 40 different nationalities, 20,000 some women over 2 months walking off the job, and that forced those textile unions to allow the women to organize, bring up their pay, make some adjustments in terms of their workforce. So it's a significant history in the labor movement. Smart place probably for Elizabeth Warren to kick off this campaign because she's been very consistent throughout her political career, talking about workers, talking about economic inequality. So we'll hear more of that from her in her speech in a few minutes.
Yes, indeed. Gyasi Ross, I want to go to you because the thing that the media has been most fixated on has been the DNA question. Elizabeth Warren brought it up herself as a way to try to get it off the table, but it put it back on the table. And now new revelations about her putting on a state bar of Texas application herself as American Indian, which she says is from her family lore, still causing a lot of consternation. I want to play for you Elizabeth Warren's apology on that, and that was on Wednesday, and her talk, in which she also talked about speaking with a representative, a member of the indigenous community about it. Take a listen.
I had a good conversation last week with Chief Baker, who is chief of the Cherokee tribes, and I told Chief Baker that I am sorry that I extended confusion about tribal citizenship and tribal sovereignty and for harm caused. I am also sorry for not being more mindful of this decades ago.
Is that enough to get this, get her past this in your mind, Gyasi?
Well, Joy, first of all, good morning.
Good morning.
You know, there's no wrong time to do the right thing. And I appreciate, I've been very critical. There's been a group of writers and people, Native people, who have been absolutely rightfully indignant and outraged by her dishonesty and her muddying the waters regarding Native identity to people who have no business at all opining about Native identity. Notable amongst those are Rebecca Nagel and Dr. Kim Tallbear. They've had an amazingly prolific and rightful critique of Elizabeth Warren. That said, I think that at some point it's important to recognize that, first of all, she did apologize. And it sounded like a sincere apology. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I can't say the sincerity of it or not, but she addressed it head on, and I appreciate that. Regarding whether or not that is sufficient, I can't say. That is between her and the Cherokee Nation. That is between her and the voters of America at large. And also, you know, we see in Virginia where we have a man who right now is fighting for his political life regarding playing with identity in a very ugly and racist way. So we have to, you know, consider whether or not she is going to be able to survive this. And I don't know the answer to that. But the question specifically about whether or not that apology was good, I thought it was a good apology. And I thought it was something that hopefully we can get to a place where Native people are not used as a campaign prop by either Elizabeth Warren or Donald Trump or anybody else non-Native. This has got to be something where we talk about issues that pertain to the Native community of what can you do to the Native community. And with that, Joy, I just want to mention that Elizabeth Warren, just like Northam in Virginia, cannot be the bar. That cannot be the standard. So it's dangerous when we put her out as sort of a caricature and say that she is something that's wrong with the Native community when almost every other presidential candidate hasn't even had a relationship with Native communities.
Fair, yeah.
So I don't want to get past that point of saying we have to focus on her myopically and let these other folks off the hook who haven't proffered forth a good idea regarding how they're going to work with these sovereign nations that exist within the United States.
Yeah, especially, Gyasi, since we saw, you know, the suppression of Native American votes in North Dakota in this last election. That has not been addressed, that kind of voter suppression activity. And Donald Trump's continuing disparaging of the community, even calling her Pocahontas, is actually, I don't know why he doesn't see that as disparaging to the Native community. I want to quickly, before I move on, get your comment, Gyasi, because now we know that Kevin McCarthy, who is the highest-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives, the minority leader of the House, had an in-law who benefited to the tune of millions of dollars by also claiming Native ancestry that doesn't seem to have validity. What do you make of that?
And once again, I think it's important to show that Elizabeth Warren and this muddying of the waters regarding Native identity is just a symptom of hundreds of years of anti-Native racism, of apathy toward Native nations, and toward just a general disdain for Native people specifically that has gone unchecked for hundreds of years. And so for us to just focus on Elizabeth Warren, I think we absolutely have to. She did something really, really, really not smart. She muddied that water further by continuing to back up and double down on her lie. However, she's not the only one. And to the degree that other presidential and political candidates don't address some affirmative vision of how they see working within these sovereign nations, these Native nations, we're letting them off the hook. And that's something we simply cannot afford to do. So I'm anxious to get past the point where we're talking about her DNA and we're talking about issues and let the voters decide whether or not this is something, this dishonesty is something that disqualifies her from being a presidential candidate.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those issues. I think that's a very fair point. point. And Karine Jean-Pierre, I want to go into one that is the other thing that is roiling sort of the right when it comes to Elizabeth Warren is this idea of a wealth tax. It's been kind of the centerpiece plank of her, at least her first big idea that she's put out there. There have been people who've been representing it as sort of a mistake to lead with something that is essentially a tax hike. What do you make of it?
I think it's just kind of ridiculous what the right is saying. I mean, look, if they want to go ahead and support people who make more $50 million or more, they go ahead and do that. It seems like a really bad play. Look, we have to understand, Elizabeth Warren is a bankruptcy lawyer expert. She's been doing it for all of her life. And also the far right who goes after her and calls her a socialist and a left-wing person, she was also a lifelong Republican. I mean, it's not that place that she comes from. She comes from a place of expertise, of experience, and she's been really consistent in that way. Look, the wealth tax is actually incredibly popular, and it's popular with majority of Republicans too, if you look at polling. And I think it's about time where you have people who make more than $50 million. If you have more than $50 million in asset, yeah, you should probably pay a little bit more. You have people who make $50,000 a year who cannot, afford just to put food on their table, many of them, and they're carrying a lot of the burden. So I think that if you're able to do this and invest, because it's supposed to also put in $2.75 billion, why not use that money to put it back into the middle class families? I think it's a smart policy, and like I said, it's incredibly popular.
Let me go to June Williams just on because, I'm a bit obsessed with the calendar. I think the map is important when it comes to getting the nomination. What you actually have to do is win some states early on, right? And now that California is early, and Super Tuesday doesn't just include California, but it also includes Elizabeth Warren's home state of Massachusetts, very interestingly for her, right? But before that, they got to come through your state. They got to come through South Carolina, which has been the candidacy killer in the past. Where is Elizabeth Warren situated to do well enough in South Carolina to be able to move on with some strength literally a week later, a little over a week later to Super Tuesday?
Well, I think she's got to do well in Iowa or New Hampshire before she gets to South Carolina. If she places first, second, or third in either of those states or both of those states, then that puts her into a really strong position coming down here to South Carolina. Can I just go back and address this issue of her Native Americanism or
Sure.
lack thereof or whatever it is? Fine. There are two parts to that. The first part is, are Native American tribes, indigenous tribes, willing to give her accept her apology and come out publicly so? If so, that's actually good for her. If not, it doesn't matter, because the Republicans, no matter what, are going to beat the hell out of her for this gaffe, for this mistake. I don't know that it's not recoverable. I don't know that it is. But in the end, if anyone thinks that Donald Trump and his sycophants are going to stop talking about this, they're wrong. They will. So the question then is, does that play down here? Does that put doubt into the minds of middle-class voters, suburban voters, ex-urban voters in South Carolina as to whether or not she has credibility? Remember what they did to Hillary Clinton for 30-plus years. They made her an incredible person. That means without credibility. They made her a crook. They made her the boogeyman, and it worked. It worked really, really well. And if they're doing exactly the same template to Elizabeth Warren, which is hound on her, talk about her credibility, say she's a liar, she's et cetera, et cetera. She's got radical, quote, socialist ideas, and that will stick with moderate voters down here, which you need in order to win. So the question, to answer your question about coming to South Carolina, yes, they better all start getting down here. All these people who think that they can be president of the United States, they better spend time down here. But nothing will stop them, nothing will hurt them worse than not being here and not knocking on doors. South Carolina voters demand one thing. You have to ask for their vote, not assume you're going to get it.
Yeah.
That applies to every person coming down here.
And it's a primary where you also have to get, African-American voters are very decisive, obviously, everywhere in the Democratic Party.
We are the majority-minority district. That's right.
It's 60%, right,
That's
of the Democratic base. Let me go to Jason on this, because it isn't just the Republicans that created a meme out of things about Hillary Clinton that were easy catchphrases, right, about her emails. Right. And it isn't just, you know, it wasn't just the Republicans, it was the media as well. And Elizabeth Warren's other issue is that the vortex that she's in isn't just a Republican or a Trump vortex, it's a media vortex too. So, you know, what are people, what is sort of the zeitgeist out there in the political world where you are constantly on the road about whether or not she's too hobbled by the media vortex that she finds herself in to get out of it and start talking about things like her wealth tax?
So Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, places that I've been in recent months, I can tell you that the Native American thing really doesn't matter, right? I mean, most people who I've spoken to, that doesn't seem to matter. I mean, on the scale of using identity for your own purposes, you've got, you know, anywhere from Rachel Dolezal to Ralph Northam, right? And I don't think she falls into either of those categories. So I don't get the impression that regular people care about it. Most people just want to know, what does Elizabeth Warren stand for? She gave a speech at the December graduation at Morgan State University where she consistently talked about how the system is unfair and how changes need to be made. She constantly says things like, look, it's not about playing the game better, it's about rewriting the rules. That's the only thing that's going to matter to regular people. What I think Elizabeth Warren has done well thus far, because this is what she's going to have to do, she's not going to get the big town halls that Schultz will get. She won't get the big town halls that Kamala Harris will get. She's not necessarily going to get some of the attention that Cory Booker will get. But guess what Elizabeth Warren is doing? She's actually in Iowa. She's been in Iowa more than everybody else. You can't win this game in the first quarter. So I think as long as she establishes that she can talk to people on a regular basis about what her policy is, I suspect that she'll be fine. Do I think she'll be the nominee? Probably not. Do I think she could beat Donald Trump? We don't necessarily know. But do I think she can be a viable candidate and that she has had probably one of the most substantive rollouts? Yeah, most definitely. And what I'm hearing on the street from just regular people is they're willing to hear what she has to say, whereas a lot of these people are already trapped in a brand that's either good or bad that they can't change.
Yeah, you know, I'm gonna take a really quick break because we're still waiting for this thing to get started. We're still watching the Elizabeth Warren launch. They're out in Massachusetts. But when I come back, I want to talk about this because she has a complicated background that she actually isn't even from Massachusetts. She's actually from Oklahoma, and she's a lifelong Republican, as Karine said. And I want to find out if, from our panel, I'm going to go around the table, whether or not those Oklahoma Republican roots, those sort of middle American roots that are unlike her brand, help her if she can make that case to a general election audience. This is Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign announcement, and then we'll join that live when we come back.